As most viewers will know, Donald Trump's Muslim ban has been reinstated in partial form, which, among other things, appears to have led to a loss for some young girls in Afghanistan. Before we get to that, I want to introduce our next guest who will discuss both those topics with us. Edina Lekovic is a consultant for the Muslim Public Affairs Council, and she joins us now. Edina, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me on.
So let's start with the Afghan girls. I was really excited about these young women coming to the country, but can you fill us in just briefly on the story with the Afghan girls robotics team?
Yeah, this is another one of those wild twists type stories that really shows why a policy like this is wrongheaded. So these are girls from across Afghanistan who were selected for a very high-profile robotics team, and at a time in our history when so much emphasis is placed on Muslim girls, Muslim women, education, having their voices, their empowerment, you would think that the opportunity to support an all-girl Afghan robotics team would be a prime opportunity to reinforce our values as Americans. But unfortunately, these girls who were slated to travel to the States for an international robotics competition and had been working months and months on their project to be able to do so, had their visas denied. Sorry, I don't know where that came from. Excuse me. And they had their visas denied under the Muslim Ban 3.0, and unfortunately, they will not be able to travel to Washington in the coming weeks. Instead, they will be in Kabul watching from a live video stream as their robot participates in the competition. They said that they decided to, even though they were not allowed to travel, that they sent their robot by FedEx to be able to compete, and that they felt that it was important that they would persevere, and that it was a very important message for our people, as their coach said. And so I think that this story is both tragic and inspiring, because it really shows it just shows how bankrupt this policy is, and how it has the ability to deny the very kind of people who would benefit most from this kind of opportunity, and also demonstrate what our values are as a country.
Well, you know, the American people were sold on these extremely expensive, and some of us would argue tragic and counterproductive wars in many cases, by saying, you know, we would be liberating the women and girls of these countries, and yet we're keeping them out. So I think that point is well taken, and putting that in a broader context, you know, everybody says that one of the reasons to develop robots and improve our robot technology is because robots go places into environments that are hostile to their creators, that are, you know, not hospitable to their creators. Are you and I now living in a country that is not hospitable to Muslims?
Well, I think you nailed it. I think that that's a great analogy. I mean, look, these girls sent their robot in a place that's inhospitable for them these days, sent their robot without them coming along for the trip. And I think that this is indicative of where we are as a country. The Trump administration has made very clear its animosity and outright distrust for foreigners, those that are both outside of our country and inside of our country, or those that they deem to be foreigners. And the level of suspicion that is being thrown at any and all immigrants is alarming. And that is something that I'm happy to say that I am proud to see Americans protesting, taking to the streets and taking to airports and taking to other places to make their opinions known. This latest round of the travel ban, now backed basically by the Supreme Court, in their decision to allow pieces of the ban to take effect until they weigh in on the case this fall. It just makes no sense. I mean, when we think about even the standards that they've applied to what bona fide family connections actually are, the fact that grandparents don't count and cousins don't count, but other kinds do. It's just willy-nilly. I mean, and for families who have strong ties and who are looking to increase those connections, this is just another slap in the face.
Yeah, let's talk about that family connection logic again. If the family connections aren't even recognized, the ones that you or I or anybody would normally think of as grandparents or family and so on, then they're not particularly meaningful. They seem, to say the least, and they don't seem to reflect family values as Donald Trump seems to always be preaching. Now, there was recently a poll, I don't know if you saw it, a political poll that claimed to suggest that the Trump Muslim ban policy had gained in popularity. Did you happen to see that?
I have seen similar polls. I think that part of that has to do with the fact that it's an ever-shifting landscape, and that the Supreme Court's decision, if we can even call it that, or this ruling, allowed that to take place, because the Supreme Court's decisions are a signal to the American public, and I think that it's understandable that opinion polls would shift. Before the Supreme Court weighed in, the public opinion towards the Muslim ban was majority against this ban and this policy as a violation of core constitutional values and a violation of our national character. But in this day and age, Trump's base supporters are unmoved by any of the data or the facts that are coming out. They remain loyal to their candidate almost no matter what. I mean, we remember that candidate Trump infamously said that he could go out onto Fifth Avenue in New York and shoot someone and he wouldn't lose any voters. Well, President Trump can try to strip some of the protections of the Constitution and our national values, and certainly some of his base won't even blink an eye. And that's what's frightening to me about this era that we live in. That's why having open, frank, and compassionate conversations with people we agree with and people we disagree with is so critical. Because unfortunately, in this kind of environment, if people are going to choose between their feelings and the facts, the data shows us that people will choose their feelings over the facts. If the facts don't match what they already believe, they're going to throw out the facts. And that's what really should be troubling to all Americans as we think about how these policies are continuing to evolve.
And again, we're talking with Edina Lekovic, who is a consultant with the Muslim Public Affairs Council. So given that to be the case, that people go with their biases and their feelings and so on, there's a sort of elasticity in the poll results. And by the way, this latest poll, which is from Politico and Morning Consult, it was phrased in such a way that Trump's name wasn't mentioned, which I'm sure shifted the numbers a little bit. And it used what I would consider the cover-up language of the State Department, that they must prove a close family relationship with a U.S. resident without explaining the inconsistencies in the way that's applied. So it may not be as significant as we think. But given of all that, and given people's tendency to go with what sounds right to them and so on, how does one go about changing public opinion on this topic?
I think it's critical that we lift up the stories of those who are most impacted by these policies, both inside of the U.S. and outside of it. This Afghan girls robotic team is the best example of that. It's when we see how these kinds of abstract policies impact real people that people's hearts can be moved. And in that fight between facts and feelings, where feelings can move people to the facts, is when they feel connected to another human story. And I think that we've seen that over and over again when it comes especially to refugees and immigrants and other vulnerable populations who have been targeted by this administration. It's when we see the stories of everyday people and how these policies are impacting them that we begin to see people be swayed, and that's what is shifting public opinion. So wherever we can uplift the these stories. I mean, there was a great Twitter hashtag campaign when the ban was, this latest round of the ban was implemented, where people uplifted the stories of family members who didn't fit the bona fide category, who would be banned from the U.S. Because they didn't fit, and to be able to show those faces is hugely important. I think that's one area that really matters. And one example of this is people, in these hard situations, people are sometimes the most open, sometimes the least open. But look, after President Trump was inaugurated and the first round of the travel ban took place, just think about the tens of thousands of people who rushed to airports, and how the stories of those individuals trying to come into the country were amplified. It's surprising to me is that the public opinion polls about Muslims, about the average American's opinion towards Muslims, actually showed a pretty impressive improvement in public opinion towards Muslims. Before this ban, before this administration, public opinion shifted. It was pretty much a 50-50 opinion most of the time about trust or distrust towards American Muslims. Since this administration has taken office, public opinion has actually shifted to 70% in support of American Muslims and feeling that they belong in our country. It's counterintuitive to me. It's not, in this time and place in our history, I certainly wouldn't expect, with all of the negative language and policies that are out there, for the American public to increase in its support and its acceptance for Muslims. But the truth is that sometimes it is in these hard-fought moments when we are under the greatest fire that our values are tested. And I'm happy to see that many Americans are reflecting that, the best of who they are, not the least of who they are. And that, I think, is the ongoing challenge, because as this administration keeps going on, the question is whether we'll have the fight and the stamina in us to continue to fight back. And even with this latest round of the ban, we're not seeing quite as much public outcry as we did in the first two rounds, because in some ways, some people feel confused, right? Some people are being let in, other people aren't being let in. So is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And this is where we have to continue to do that kind of education and uplift those personal stories, so that people can feel a connection to someone who is most directly impacted.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the positive side of it, which is the increase in trust, perhaps paradoxically, perhaps not, as a result of Trump's hostility. And, I was very moved. I went here in Washington, D.C. to the demonstration against the ban after the airport incidents in January. I guess it was late January, early February. And I went there with my daughter and my grandson, who apparently, according to the State Department, is not a close family relative. I didn't know that. And I was very moved by the support and love and solidarity shown there. So I guess we'll end with this, Edina Lekovic. I'm sure these have been very trying times in the Muslim community here in the United States, with so much fear. Mosques have received threats of violence and so on. What is the mood now?
These are extremely challenging times. I think that this is a holding our breath moment, and it's been going on for a long time. But look, our community has just come out of our holiest time of the year, the month of Ramadan, when there's fasting and feasting and community and charity, and during this precious month, we saw a string of hate crimes against Muslim women, particularly, that had a really chilling effect, and Muslim women who wear headscarves, I should say, or the hijab, as it's called. Whether it was the Portland metro attack, where the three men valiantly stood to defend a young Muslim woman in hijab and her friend, or it was a Somali immigrant woman in Ohio who was savagely beaten by someone because she was coming to the defense of another Muslim woman that person was mocking, or whether it was just the recent murder of a 17-year-old girl in Alexandria, Virginia, or arrest in Virginia, who was murdered late at night when she was with her friends outside of a mosque or coming back to a mosque after evening prayers, and she'd just come back from an IHOP, and there was an altercation that took place. This string of incidents is what has left our community feeling in shock and horror and a deep sense of mourning. I just came back from one of the largest national conferences in the American Muslim community, and that sense of mourning and of disbelief is very deep. It's very deep, and particularly again for Muslim women and Muslim girls, those who choose to cover, the idea of being a publicly identifiable Muslim means it's a new level of courage and bravery that it takes, and that's not something that I thought I would say a year ago. But today, to be a public Muslim takes a certain level of courage and self-confidence, and that's a sad state of affairs. But we do have to lean on the side of hope and of possibility, and to continue to remember that the outpouring of love that our communities have received is tenfold that of any hostility or distrust or animosity that our local communities have seen. Unfortunately, though, one tragic incident overshadows the positivity and increases the level of fear. So we're looking for more and more opportunities to create connections between our local community members and others in their communities, because we know that the single most powerful thing we can do is introduce people to Muslims. Here and today in the U.S., over 60% of Americans say that they do not know a Muslim firsthand, which is not surprising when you think about the fact that just 1% to 2% of Americans are Muslims themselves. But we also know that the single greatest predictor of somebody's perception of Islam and Muslims is whether they know a Muslim. So exposure is everything. And for your viewers and your listeners out there, I hope that they will dig deep and think about an opportunity where they might be able to go out and meet somebody that they don't necessarily know, or that a community that they don't have familiarity with. And because in this day and age, that's one of the bravest and most important things that we can do to break down those barriers.
And now our viewers know you. So Edina Lekovic, consultant with the Muslim Public Affairs Council, thanks for your bravery, and thanks for your wisdom, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
And we will be right back after this. I am RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.